Tshelo bani ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
Tshelo bani
Ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
Good evening, and welcome to this second session of this evening's program. And the topic under discussion tonight is, when does the Arab Spring become summer? I have the honor and pleasure to introduce and welcome two very distinguished writers here tonight. Bahaar Taher from Egypt and Ibrahim Al-Koni from Libya. And seated on Ibrahim's right is Maria Langa, who will be doing the translation for Mr. Koni. We seem to have run out of Arabic to English translators in the city of Durban, so Mr. Al-Koni will be speaking Russian, and Maria will be translating for him. Bahaar Taher. Bahaar Taher is one of the oldest statesmen of Egyptian literature. He was born in 1935 in Cairo.
Why should you say that?
There's a reason I'm doing that. And after graduating from the University of Cairo, he started to work in Radio 2, which is the cultural channel of Egyptian radio. And in 1964, he started to publish his first short story. He was active in the left-wing and avant-garde circles in the 1960s and was a writer and member of Gallery 68, which was a movement that sought to challenge literature politics at the time. A storyteller and social commentator, Taher lost his radio broadcasting job and was banned from publishing in the mid-70s in Anwar Sadat's Egypt. In 1981, he left for Geneva, where he worked as a translator for the United Nations, and after many years in exile in Switzerland, he returned to Egypt and is today very active in cultural circles once again. His books have been translated into many languages, and his collected works have been published in Cairo in 1992. He's regarded as one of the most widely read contemporary novelists in the Arab world, and in 1998, he received the State's Merit of Literature Award, and in 2000 was awarded the prestigious Italian Giuseppe Acebi Prize for his widely acclaimed novel, My Aunt Sophia and the Monastery. He received the inaugural International Prize for Arabic Literature in 2008. In his book, Love in Exile, Taher's protagonist wonders. It occurred to me that in the past, we knew politicians thanks to the poets. But today, we want to know the poet through the politician. We kill our poets with silence, and we kill them with forgetfulness. I wanted to ask Ibrahim, if it is true that poets are the nation's conscience, what is the fate of a nation that forgets its poets? Taher has also stated that I have always thought that you cannot separate politics from fiction. It is important to combine what is happening to ordinary people, because what happens in the political field affects everyone. But I have never believed that a writer should be used as a political tool. Mr. Taher, we can perhaps start off the discussion by talking about the issue of the relationship between state and culture, and how this has formed quite a central issue in your life and in your works.
Thank you, but first let me correct a mistake. You said it's 1953, not 35.
That is why I said 1935, because he is as agile and alert as he was a 16-year-old.
Okay, now my answer to your question, why don't you ask Ibrahim Al-Koni first?
I'm going to ask you.
Would you like to answer, Ibrahim?
No, I think...
Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Junaid, and I'm glad to welcome you and to welcome all the audience. You are asking me a question about the relation between state policy and culture. It's It's an integral relation which I think can affect both sides either positively or negatively. I have seen it in both cases during my life. I have seen culture, let me use this chance to mention that we lost last week or within the last 10 days, a very great person who was a minister of culture during Nasser's period. His name is Okasha, Tharwat Okasha. This man who did initiate so many activities, including establishing the Academy for Arts and Drama in Cairo, and also the National Theater, and so many activities. He died over the age of 90, but we felt that we did lose a real great man in our life. He was part of a national resurrection of the country during the 60s. That's what that's how I would answer your question. And during that period, and the relation between culture and the state were very positive in a sense that the regime in power was trying to give Egypt a particular status in the region and in the world. So they encouraged writers, they encouraged this minister to initiate all the programs he did. And also, they encouraged writers and artists who did, during that time, produce very great achievements for the country. That was the time when Naguib Mahfouz, the Nobel Prize laureate, began writing, also Yusuf Idris and other very famous writers. Also in art, there were some great painters and some great sculptors. How do you say that? How do you say about the people who make statues? Sculpturer? Huh?
Sculpture.
Sculptors.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, then after that, there came a period when the state did neglect purposely anything that has to do with cultural activities, which led not only to the decadence of literature and art, but also led to the decadence of the whole country in a way that, because they did not let the soul of the country express itself, the country lost its soul. And that was during 2 decades, the 70s and the 80s. And then came after that the very long rule of Lavashkiri, and in that rule, everything was lost. We tried, we hoped that with the end of his power, when he was toppled, that the country would revive again its aspirations and its hopes, but there are so many things that still stop us from doing what we would dream to do. And I would tell you later on what.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also I'd like to know personally for you, your journey to the various regimes in Egypt, and how has that impacted and affected your writing?
Listen, I'm saying now that I am thinking very positively of the time when Nasser was president of the country. But when he was in power, I was against him. And of course, I was against Sadat. But Nasser was, either he was more patient with writers, or it was part of his policy to encourage writers accepting their mild criticism. But Sadat did not have this spirit at all. So I had to leave the country in the mid-70s in exile, because I lost my work that you were speaking about as a speaker of the radio in the cultural program, so it was program 2 of Cairo Radio. And I thought I would be leaving the country for a few months. Turned out that it became 20 years, having to leave my country and having to leave my hopes, and not able to publish a word in Egypt. And so I believe that, yes, the relation between the state and culture did affect my life very badly.
Okay. We want to introduce Ibrahim Al-Koni, who is a Libyan writer and regarded as one of the most prolific Arabic novelists. Born in also 1948, he was brought up in the tradition of the Tuareg, traditionally pastoral nomadic people who have moved freely across the Sahara. Today, however, national boundaries have hindered and limited that migratory pattern. But Al-Koni has spent most of his childhood in the desert, and by the age of 12, learned to speak Arabic and write in Arabic. He has studied comparative literature at the Maxim Gorky Institute in Moscow, and has worked as a journalist both in Moscow and in Warsaw. He has lived in Switzerland since 1993. Al-Koni has published more than 80 books, written in Arabic, and have been translated into 35 languages. And he has been the recipient of many international awards, including the prestigious Swiss State Award and the important Arabic Novel Award in 2010. At this award, the jury had this to say: Al-Koni was chosen for his ability to breathe life in the desert on the human, natural, spiritual, and mythological levels, and the jury further praised his ability to utilize folklore, oral tradition, death rituals, and aspects of everyday life to create a literary work. Al-Koni has once stated, "My starting point is the desert. As it is inevitable with one's birthplace, the desert buries enigmatic signs in the souls of its natives that slumber deep within and one day must awake. The signs that my great desert planted within me have made a poet of me and a seeker after the truth in this world." Mr. Koni, your work is very deeply rooted in its desert origins. And so how has this place and has shaped and informed your writing, your thoughts, your philosophy, in fact, your entire being?
Ваша работа основана на пустыне. Как это отразилось, как пустыня вообще влияет на ваше творчество?
Пустыня, конечно, для меня не только родина, которую я ношу с собой.
Desert for me is not only my homeland,
которую я ношу с собой,
which I carry with me,
но она для меня метафора.
but it's also a metaphor for me.
Метафора для, которая выражает человеческого бытия вообще.
A metaphor that is expressing the existence of a human.
И туареги — это не просто туареги там, но там они символизируют человечество вообще.
And Tuaregs, not only Tuaregs, but also represent humanity.
Кто читал мои книги, это может чувствовать очень легко.
For those who read my books, could feel it through them.
Конечно, писать А пустыни это тоже не легко, даже очень трудно.
Of course, it's not easy to write about a desert, but in fact, it's quite difficult.
Потому что была всегда доминирующая теория начала 20-х годов, который ввел Джордж Лукач в литературу, когда писал о Томе Соймане, который говорит, что вообще роман это принадлежит городу, это городское искусство.
А кто написал?
Джордж Лукач.
George Lukács has stated a theory that has been preserved since then, that a novel is always based, it's a phenomenon of a city.
Это был для меня большой вызов создать роман в пустыне, там, где не может существовать роман по идее и по теории литературы.
So for me, it was a big quest and a challenge to write a novel that is based in the desert, not where, on the contrary, people would not actually think of a novel and romance.
Потому что стереотип есть у всех людей, что пустыня – это пустота.
There is a perception that desert is emptiness,
Пустыня – это ничто.
and that desert is nothing.
Пустыня ровно как называется, ничего не существующего. Нету там принцип пространства и времени.
That in desert, dimension and time does not exist.
А что оказывается, когда я принял этот вызов и начал писать многокнижные романы?
So what happened to me when I began this quest and started to write my several books, several novels?
Оказывается, место там, где рождается роман, это и не город, и не деревня, и не определенные пространства, а центр этого искусства – это человек.
So I found that a novel is born not in a city, not in a desert, not in a village, but the center of the creation of birth is actually inside a human being.
Почему?
Why?
Потому что человек только есть загадка.
Because the human existence itself is a mystery.
Поэтому там, где находился человек, всегда есть не только роман, но и эпопея.
So a place where a human is, there will always be not only a novel or a romance, but also romance, or also epos.
А принятие мною этого вызова смог я писать не только одна эпопея, но роман в сериях, в книгах, но писал больше 7 многокнижных романов.
So when I began this quest, I was not only able to write several books, several novels in it, but also many books around this topic.
И трудность в чем? Трудность в том, что пространство в Сахаре – это не пространство, и время – это не мирское время.
But my difficulty was that the dimensions in the desert are not only, it is not human dimensions, it is not of our world.
Вопрос пространства и времени. Пространство в пустыне, это не имеет мирское измерение. И время тоже не имеет мирское измерение.
So the question of dimensions in desert will not have a human understanding and perception. It is basically above human reality.
Это метафизическое
It's a metaphysical dimension
и метафизическое время.
and metaphysical time.
А чтобы хорошо выразить, хорошо писать о метафизическом времени и о метафизическом пространстве, это нужно очень сложный подход к философии.
So when one has to write about metaphysical dimensions and metaphysical time dimensions, one has to touch on philosophical and go in depth into philosophical questions.
Нужно здесь принять вызов вопросы экзистенции, вопросы бытия человеческого.
So we have to look at the questions of existence, human existence, and
И человеческий вопрос не должен быть здесь стоять голый вопрос, голая философия. Нет, а должна быть философия изнутри.
so we can't have just a naked philosophy as well. We have to look inside and tackle those questions from inside.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to move on very quickly to our topic under discussion tonight, and I would like to ask both Mr. Al-Koni and Mr. Taher to give us a sense of what is happening in Egypt and Libya right now. What have been the gains of the Arab Spring, but more importantly, to tell us what are the challenges facing the people and the country right now. Mr. Taher, would you like to start?
Yes, but would you allow me to read few lines? Because when I am so tired like now, all languages mixed in my mind. I wonder whether I should say I shall or I will. I don't know. So, if you excuse me, I shall try to answer this. Why and when would the Arab Spring become summer, if ever? Anyway, seeing the Arab Spring turning into glorious summer is the hope of all Arabs. I cannot speak for other countries, but what I know about Egypt may serve as an indicator to what is happening elsewhere. Instability is a common feature after all revolutions and uprisings. This Egyptian Spring is not an exception. Elements of the old regime that the revolution sought to topple, paying a dear price of martyrs' blood, are still there and they are very active. They try to stop any move forward and to push the country back to their good old days. They comprise 3 blocks, all working hand in hand. The businessmen that sapped the country's wealth over the last decades, the government corrupt bureaucracy that benefited from the falling regime, and the police and security forces, also corrupt and very loyal to their old masters. Because of the efforts of those combined elements, the country is suffering and is paralyzed in a standstill. The new forces that heralded the Egyptian Spring are not yet combined or united. They comprise the young women and men who led the demonstrations against the regime, and citizens of modest middle and poor classes that represent the vast majority of the population. According to statistics, 40% of the Egyptian people are below the poverty line, according to official statistics, I say. However, the sympathy of the people, the ordinary people, towards the Spring Revolution seems to be waning and eroding. There is very strong and effective propaganda spread by the aforementioned elements of counter-revolution, attributing the deterioration in the economic situation and the vertiginous rising cost of life from which all laymen suffer in Egypt, attributing all this to the instability caused by the revolution. According to them, investors at home and abroad are afraid to invest in the country, and the tourists are also afraid to come. And that is the reason why things are deteriorating, according to them, of course. There are also two major factors of concern. First, the country is living a so-called transitional period, where the political authority is in the hands of the military council, declaring neutrality, but in most cases siding with the old bureaucracy and not at all sympathetic to the young revolutionaries, men and women. In more than one incident, the military didn't refrain from shooting and killing those young revolutionaries. Second, the newly elected parliament, in this newly elected parliament, the Muslim Brotherhood and other hardline Islamic parties won a vast majority. Historically, the Brotherhood are the best, if not the only, organized political party in the country. Until now, this force, I mean the force of the Islamic hardliners, until now they did not declare their detailed plans concerning how to implement the aims of the Spring Revolution, which was summarized in slogans: bread, freedom, social justice, and dignity. That's where the slogans of the young revolutionaries during the...
Everybody but...
Excuse me. You are not going to kill me anyway, no? Okay. What was I saying? I said that the slogans of the revolution: bread, freedom, social justice, and dignity. The Brotherhood and other hardline religious parties are, for the time being, encouraging very praiseworthy moral and ethical values, urging the rich to help the poor, and preaching in favor of charity. They declare that their policy is against American and Western domination in the Arab world, but they are very friendly with the rich oil Gulf states that are very pro-Western and politically classified as belonging to the extreme right. A religious party that has won 1/5 of the seats of the parliament is adopting ultra-conservative principles concerning the rights, or actually the non-rights of women. Art and literature, according to this party, are very badly seen as forms of decadence, if not symbols of heresy. On the other side, there are some reasons for hope that the Egyptian Spring will flourish. Our modern civil state in Egypt is the oldest in the region. It developed values of democracy and freedom for men and women through 2 centuries. Supporters of this civil state do not give up easily, and they are almost in daily battles to defend freedom of expression, and in many cases, they win. Also, the young women and men that initiated the revolutionary movement are still very active. They may not outnumber their adversaries, but they surpassed them in the ability to gather people around the revolutionary cause. In the first anniversary of this revolution, last 25 January, very discouraged, this event was very discouraged by the military council, but the young men and women succeeded in organizing multi-million demonstrations in Tahrir and other squares of Egypt. They have also managed to attract some of the supporters of the religious parties, especially among the young men and women who take part in demonstrations of their peers rather than obey the orders of their religious leaders to refrain from demonstrating. As a student of history myself, in the first place, I believe that the forces nearer to the aspiration of the future win at last. This doesn't happen overnight, but the real glorious summer is coming sooner than some people may expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taher. Could we ask Mr. Al-Koni very briefly to give us also a sense of what's happening in Libya, and also with the Transitional National Council trying to represent the various interests in the country. Is this working?
По-моему, сами ливийцы не знают, что происходит сейчас в Ливии. Сами ливийцы, по-моему, не знают, что происходит сейчас в Ливии.
I think people of Libya themselves don't know what's happening in Libya right now.
Самой приходное правительство и council сами не знают, что происходит в стране.
And the National Council also doesn't know what's happening right now.
Одним словом, хаос.
It's a chaos.
Это значит, что до сих пор правительство работает очень слабо, и ее функции вообще не выполняет.
And I think that what it means that up till now the government works really
Слабо.
weak and doesn't actually carry out its duty properly.
Переходной комитет, национальный комитет тоже.
And the transitional government also.
Там идет вообще частично гражданская война.
Partly it is civil war.
Многие каждый день сотни людей умирают.
Hundreds die every day.
Между не только племенами ведется эта война, но между арабами и меньшинством, другими национальностями, меньшинство.
Not only the tribes at war amongst themselves, but also between Arabs and the minorities of Libya.
Там вместо того, чтобы смотреть правду в глаза, многие группировки ведут войну с мертвыми.
And we have groups, террористы, да?
Вместо того, чтобы смотреть правду в глаза,
Instead of looking at the truth, at the bait truth,
многие группы, как исламисты, например, ведут войну не против живых, еще против мертвых.
for example, some groups, for example, some Islamic groups, they at war not only with the living but also with the dead.
Они дошло до того, что выкопали скелетов мертвых во Второй мировой войне христиан.
It come to a point where they actually dug out the graves of the Christian people that were buried in Second World War.
И не только против христиан, но и выкопали тоже скелетов мертвых лидеров софистических движений.
Not only Christians graves were dug out, but also some Sufis leaders.
Поэтому, когда многие районы посмотрели, что происходит, что правительство бессильное, хотели как будто не независимость, а как называется это по-русски, это иметь какую-то автономию.
So when most regions saw that the government is at loss and it cannot actually do its duty, they wanted their independence.
Автономию, совсем отделение. Это не совсем, но автономия – это значит федеральный способ, который когда-то существовал с 1901 года, 1951 года до 1963 года.
So
как Бенгази, этот район Бенгази, первый. Да, после независимости 1951.
So when they gained their independence from 1951 to 1953. 63.
Это называется в то время королевская Ливия была федеральная страна.
That was a federal country.
Который содержит Барка, и Триполи, и Физан на юге.
That has Barca, Tripoli, and Fizan at the south.
И, конечно, требования автономии.
So the requirements for the independence.
Это диктовано бессилие государства, нету государства.
So the requirement for the independence and the wish for autonomy was based on failure of government.
И люди мечтают, когда придет выборы, которые будут через 2 месяца, и думают, что они принесут спасение. Но это вряд ли принесут спасение, потому что когда нет государства, я не знаю, какие могут быть выборы.
So people are hoping for the elections. They're looking forward to elections and think that this will bring some sort of relief. But I doubt there will be any relief because what can we do when there's no real government?
Говорят об необходимости восстановления приходной справедливости.
They speak about need to establish transitional justice.
Но приходная справедливость не может быть там, где все воюют против друг друга.
But we can't have it when everyone is at war with each other.
И никто ничего не делает, чтобы остановить это.
And nothing is done to stop that.
Другая проблема – это коррупция.
And we have also corruption.
После свержения прошлого режима международная общественность позволила освободить для Ливии около $200 миллиардов. И эти $200 миллиардов исчезли в стране, никто не знает, каким образом и куда.
$200 billion was allocated to Libya previously from the federal, from the from Europe and United States, but no one knows where the money has gone to.
Таким образом, будущее просто кануло в неизвестность.
And that's why we haven't got much hope for the future.
Люди в унынии вообще.
And people are really feeling down. хочет еще вопрос задать какой-то?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Al-Koni. I think we have just about 10 minutes left, and I want to open it up for discussion. We're going to take a question at a time, and I'd like it if you just say who you want to respond to that question or issue that you're raising.
Сейчас вопросы из студии.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'd like to address my question to, direct my question to the Egyptian gentleman. Last year, during the time of the riots, we had a lady from Egypt, and she spoke about the revolution in Egypt and the excitement, I guess, at Tahrir Square at the time when everything was happening in Egypt. And it was such a contagious kind of hope of what is going to happen in Egypt after the revolution. And what I'd like to know is, in my experience, especially in South Africa, during the struggle, everybody was fighting towards a common goal. And afterwards, there was that kind of a hope. And a few years later, it dies down and apathy creeps in, and we don't really have that same kind of excitement and hope and fighting towards a certain goal, similar goals. What I'd like to know is, tonight you said that you have a hope and you see the Arabics, some are coming even sooner than what people may think. What's the feeling on the street? What do people think, like, especially young people in Egypt? Do they see things changing soon? And are they still as excited or as fighting towards seeing a change in Egypt? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry?
When my colleague was here last year, writer Sahar al-Mogi, I think, we all had very high hopes. It was the time when we thought that we are very near to achieve all our goals that we have been dreaming for years, decades, or even centuries. But as I tried to explain here, there are multiplicity of motives that caused this change in mood and in situation in the country. I mentioned four reasons at least. But I said also that as a student of history, I am a student of history, I believe that the young men and women who initiated this movement in Egypt and who are still aspiring to achieve the goals of their revolution will be winning at last. I said it will not be easy at all. I don't know how I can compare this situation with the situation in South Africa, as you mentioned. I'm not quite aware of the situation in South Africa except for the very general lines. But in Egypt, I believe, as I said, that the movement of history is moving, is heading towards the realization of the aspirations of the young men and women, because they are the force of the future, and they will certainly continue their sacrifices until they achieve their goals. They do that now. I'm sure they will continue doing it in the future. That's all I said.
Thanks. Just want to ask the gentleman from Libya. We've had this unceremonious removal of Gaddafi in Libya, and the TNC to, of course, get through the transition process to entrench democracy in Libya, which seems to be very much influenced by external forces and external interest as opposed to be coming from within. I'd like to touch on that, but also I just would like to understand what is at the center of the hostilities between the Arabic hardliners in Libya, between them and the Africans or the blacks in Libya that have been at the receiving end of these lynching and assaults. I'm just trying to understand if perhaps are these people that have been around Libya because of Gaddafi's of Pan-Africanist sort of inclination. Seemingly, just after the demise or the elimination of Gaddafi, the Africans in Libya have been at the receiving end, and we've seen from different reports from different sort of news agencies globally where he spoke about the minorities being eliminated. So I'd like him to touch on that. Thank you.
I think the next question is going to be very, very short. We only have 2 minutes left.
That was a long question. This is not a question, this is a discussion. So a discussion requires a discussion. And also patience.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We have run out of time. On behalf of the CCA and on behalf of all of you, I'd like to thank these two distinguished writers for being on the panel here tonight and for gracing us with their presence. And thank you, Maria, for the translation, and good night, everyone.